This is the Balancing Act by Security Compass, your guide to going fast while staying safe in today's digital world. On part 6 of Leaders in Product Security, Rohit Sethi, CEO at Security Compass, is joined by Khaja Ahmed, Senior VP of Product and Application Security at SAP. Over the last 3 decades, Khaja has worked on a variety of security technologies at every level of the stack. From crypto accelerator chips and hardware to operating systems and applications from IaaS and PaaS to SaaS, he regards this as a great education in the domain of security. Working in senior and critical roles in SAP, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft has given Khaja exposure to diverse leadership styles and cultures that he enjoys debating the pros and cons of.
All right, Khaja, well, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Pleased to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Rohit. This is a conversation I think I'll enjoy, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Sounds good. Well, why don't we start with telling us a little bit about how you got into the field of product security?
I guess more broadly in security, some of us start from the other side, right, which is we violate security, right? I'll age myself here, but that's okay. Ages ago, I grew up in India, and software was back then extremely expensive to buy on an Indian salary and income. So breaking software licenses was kind of just the thing we did, right? There wasn't a license I couldn't break. And I didn't even think of that as security or anything. It was just, hey, I wanted that software and I couldn't afford to buy it. I'm talking now 89, 88, that time frame, right? And of course, in India, there was its own version of phone phreaking. It was on pulse dial, and there was a way of tapping the bell at a certain frequency on locked phones and making international calls. So a variety of things like that, and I learned to break into all kinds of things. That's how I got into the offensive side. So when I joined a security company and had to play the defense side, I think that offensive training really taught me a lot. So that's kind of how I came into it.
Yeah, the defensive side is a lot of work.
It is, and having played offense, I know how hard it is.
Yeah. So what's your view on product security specifically? How does it differ and how is it similar to enterprise security?
I'd say enterprise security, when people say enterprise security, most people are thinking about infrastructure security, which is firewalls and your authentication service and let's say Active Directory and load balancers and your web servers and operating systems and things like that. Whereas product security in a software company is the products you build, it's the applications you write. So a shorthand way of thinking about this from my perspective is code we write versus code we buy, right? So as an example, here at SAP, we are building ERP systems and customer relationship management systems and traveling systems and so forth, right? So that's the code we write, and it might run on AWS and then you have their load balancers and gateways and firewall systems. That's code you buy, right? So that's the distinction is how I think about it. Infrastructure versus application development might be another way to think about it.
Okay. And where should product security report to? Engineering, information security, or risk management, or to a different function?
I think security does, at least in this day and age, especially in this day and age, needs to be its own distinct function reporting to the CEO. So in my case, I think I have exactly the right model, which is I report to the the CISO, Tim McKnight, who reports to the CEO. So that gives me the latitude from the perspective of governance and setting standards and doing assessments on what the security state is independently. That said, product security is necessarily a distributed function. So the product teams themselves need deep security expertise. They really need to have people who deeply understand what it means to build resilient and robust applications that can withstand attacks from the most well-heeled and the best trained actors, state actors and organized crime and so forth. So um, in that way, let's think about product security as being two parts of it, that which is integrated into the product team, and that needs to be really very, very good and tightly bound to the product team and inside the product team and high quality security engineers. And then, of course, the central function, which sets the standards and, let's say, reports on the state of product security for management decisions. So the company can decide, is our security posture what it should be, or do we need to invest more and so forth?
So it's a federated model as well as having the central organization.
Correct. Yeah. Federated, sometimes people interpret to mean completely distributed. And I do think that central function is super important.
Right.
The uniformity in practices, especially in large companies, is crucial. Otherwise, the chances that every team does its own thing in a way that is difficult to assess, and it makes it difficult to offer security guarantees to our customers, becomes a problem.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you've had a rare experience of working at senior level positions for the three leading infrastructure as a service cloud providers, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Can you talk a bit about what you learned from these companies?
I'll say that was an amazing education, and I got so lucky. These are amazing companies to have worked for. And boy, what an education it was. So I've learned a ton. I could probably speak about that itself is probably a podcast and an hour-long conversation. But I can summarize a few things and I can extract a few things, and we can think of it both as what did I learn from each of these companies, and in some ways, what was the best part about each of these companies. I guess working backwards from Google, I learned what truly good engineering at scale looks like. Google's ability to build global scale, planet scale services with extraordinarily good engineering, the kind of things that you read in theory about, right? Very resilient, clean code, very secure. I mean, it was a joy to watch that, and I encourage developers everywhere to read Building Secure Applications. It's a Google book. I may be butchering the title here a bit, and I hope you will provide a link to your listeners on this. But that's a fantastic book. I think every developer should read. So that was the best engineering I've seen done anywhere. I'll say the thing I learned from Amazon is customer obsession and how to get things done lean and fast. There's no company that can beat Amazon when it comes to just getting things done. And sometimes that can take a bit of a toll on your personal life, and it's a double-edged sword and something to watch out for. But boy, do they think about the industries they've disrupted, from bookselling to retail in general to cloud computing to making movies and television. It's just crazy. It's just crazy, right? I mean, Alexa and so forth. So getting things done and their principles, Amazon's leadership principles, are something that I still practice and teach. Right? So, and these are very different competencies, and each uses its competencies in really good ways.
I would say Amazon's really good at not just getting things done, but getting things, period, at least in this house. we use Amazon for everything. You want something and you get it the next day. But anyway, bit of an aside.
And that's the customer obsession part. Isn't it an amazing experience buying from Amazon?
Yeah, it is.
It's just crazy. And yeah. I mean, boy, did they nail it. I have to say I'm pretty pleased with how SAP does that as well. SAP's customer focus is also really something to be proud of. So I'm happy about that, because that really matters. Microsoft was an interesting thing. I guess the couple of lessons learned there is, let's say, using your inheritance wisely. right? Microsoft had such a huge install base through Windows and their Office suite. It took them a while to parlay that into AWS, but they did. They persisted, and I guess the second lesson from Microsoft is persistent. They kind of stayed. They initially lost the race to AWS, right? I mean, the whole cloud computing thing. I mean, I was there, and I was in the server and tools business unit when that thing was happening, and it was a bit of a bummer to see AWS take the lead in cloud computing. But Microsoft stayed the course, and look at where it is today, right? So persistence, especially if you're able to pour money into it for as long as Microsoft did, and leveraging your installed base and your other assets is, I think, a great lesson to be learned from Microsoft. Let's say, what were the broader lessons? The state of the art in certainly security, cloud security, and potentially computer science in general is evolving and is born in some sense in these companies, right? And I don't mean just these three companies, Netflix and Facebook and Twitter. These companies are solving problems that others haven't yet understood they have, right? Because they're sort of at the forefront of it, and they have problems that no one else even has even thought about, right? And they're experiencing those problems, and they have to solve that, which it makes for a tremendous education if you do a tour of duty in any of these companies. And it also means that the rest of the industry is 5 to 10 years behind, because by the time they solve a problem, refine it, document it well enough to explain it to others, and it either becomes a standard in a standards body or becomes some open source program, which then gets adopted in companies, you're talking somewhere between 5 and 10 years. 5 is optimistic. Five is aggressive, right? I can tell you, although I probably can't tell you, some of the things that are being done in these companies, which I suspect at some point will be more broadly adopted. It's looking to them for a source of ideas and trying to adopt them quickly is one of the things that I think the market could benefit from. And the last point I'll make about these companies, especially my experience in Microsoft, is culture of a company comes from the top. My story about Microsoft is that I joined Bill Gates' company and I left Ballmer's company. And the two were very different companies. The same roughly 100,000 people when I was there, or whatever the number of employees were. But it's amazing how much the style of the leadership can change your engineering priorities, and down to trivial things like how meetings are conducted and how people behave with each other. I mean, even things like that are essentially shaped by strong leaders, right? And if you listen to Jeff Bezos or read about him and listen to him talk and read his writings, you can pretty much tell what Amazon culture is.
Right.
So the culture is a super important thing to get right. And really, the bulk of the burden falls on the person at the top and maybe the handful of that person's key lieutenants.
Yeah, makes sense. So quite the storied career, a lot of experience in security and product security across all these different companies. What advice would you give to a company that's just getting started with product security?
Oh boy, it would probably have to vary with the size of the company. But for large companies which have, let's say, a rich and deep product portfolio, I would say the single most important thing is to try to get to a common tool chain and application development framework. It's very hard to get security right at scale. It's extremely hard. And trying to do that, let's say if you have different product units doing different things in their own way, trying to get them all to do it right is extremely tough. So getting people onto a common tool chain, libraries, frameworks, shared set of services, deployment templates, and a hardened environment in which their applications and products can be deployed. That, I would say, needs to be your number one priority. Trying to figure out how to get everybody to do things securely in their own way is tough. For most people, it'll be infeasible. And the other thing I'll say is make sure that your security investment is commensurate with the criticality of the application that you're building. Be aware of the role that your application plays in your customer's business, right? I mean, the example somewhat glibly that I use often is what you invest in protecting credit cards and what you invest in protecting nuclear codes is not going to be the same thing. Nuclear launch codes is not going to be the same thing. So be aware, credit cards are super important, but probably people's healthcare data is more, and perhaps their personal information and photographs and personal communication with their loved ones is, also super important for businesses, financial transactions, acquisition plans, state of their finances. These things are super important. So being aware of what assets your application is designed to protect is super important. One final thing I'll say about what should you do is you're not going to be able to do all the things you want to do. That's guaranteed. So what you're going to have to do is understand what are all the things you want to do, stack rank them and say what are the most important things. It's kind of common sense, right? And just sort of focus on the things that are most important, but almost as importantly, be aware that those other things that you're not getting to will at some point become crucially important. Don't lock yourself out of options that prevent you from doing that. So think about your architecture and design and your deployment models in ways that position you to do these things when the need arises, because it will. That's a certainty. So that would be some rough advice.
Good. Yeah, that's helpful. Anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners?
Well, I guess depending on, again, if you're in IT, in any role, a developer, sysadmin, network admin, even program manager, you're a security engineer. Know that.
Right.
The world we live in, security has become paramount, right? I mean, I don't know if everyone who's listening has followed the whole SolarWinds episode. If you haven't, you should Google it and read up on it. That'll tell you how serious matters are. And everybody's job is security. If you're in IT in any way, shape, or form, you are a security engineer, know that. What I'd share by way of guidance to business leaders and senior executives is be willing and prepared to make very difficult trade-offs and sacrifices, because you're going to need to deal with security sooner or later, and you can either do it when the house is on fire or do it and position yourself to do it before the house catches fire, because those embers are coming your way and your house will catch fire, and how well prepared you are will determine whether you still have a house at the end of that or not. And the third, let's say, stakeholder in this, if you're a customer, make your security demands explicit. Make no assumptions about what your vendor is doing security-wise. Make an effort to look into it, satisfy yourself. I don't care if you have to use third-party auditors or something like that, but don't make assumptions. Make your requirements explicit. And it doesn't matter who the vendor is. Obviously, the bigger, well-heeled, well-established vendors are going to be doing a better job because they've sort of been through the drill and they're already being audited by tons of customers. So this becomes much more important when you're dealing with smaller, less well-established companies. But even with the large ones and with all vendors in general, make sure your requirements and your demands for high levels of security or the appropriate levels of security are explicit. That's
Great advice. Yeah, I think if the more people ask for it, the more it becomes a market-driven demand and not something that people can choose as optional. So
Yep.
it's already the case for massive organizations, but it's not true for all software companies. So I think the tide is turning there.
That is true. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Khaja, thank you so much. Very insightful, very storied career. So great to hear your insights, and thank you very much.
Thanks a bunch, Rohit. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was fun for me. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Want to learn about what Security Compass has to offer? Check out securitycompass.com/demo for a free demo today. Want more of the balancing act? Be sure to subscribe to our channel wherever you listen to podcasts for more episodes.